nerds and other unfortunates have been fervently waiting for has finally arrived. It's time for TMI, Confessionals of the Nerd Kind. And now, your hosts, Jeff Nerfherder Chandler, Jim Kaiju Baker, and Christina Yojimbo Henry. You can continue. And now, let's get on with the show. Here is TMI.
It looks unbelievably crisp. There's a few scenes where you can see a little bit of grain just across the top of the frame. But other than that, like, you can't even tell that it was, shot on film. It was
I kind of like the telltale grain here and there.
Mhm.
Kind of reminds you maybe a little bit of what the theater experience was like, because I'm sure they didn't look this nice when they played in the theater initially.
Well, the thing, I prefer film because I think that it looks warmer.
Compare that to listening to vinyl as compared to listening to an MP3 or even a
Right.
CD. It's
Sure,
the same kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, there's like a warmth there, like the more analog formats. And I really notice it in film. And a lot of things now look too crisp to me. And certainly the new TVs. My husband keeps saying, let's upgrade our TV. I'm like, I don't want to
Mhm.
because the new ones are so hyper real looking. They look
It's
weird.
more real than real. It's more
Yeah.
real than reality. It's like reality doesn't look like that. I'm looking around the room. It doesn't look like that.
Mhm. When you first go in at Costco, they have that's first thing you see are like the TVs, like this huge wall, setup of TVs. And they always have like the biggest one available, which is, now like what, 70 inches, 80
Yeah,
inches.
yeah.
Like they're so huge.
And it used
And-
to be that the bigger that you got, the worse the picture was. But that's not the case anymore.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Hi, everybody.
Buongiorno.
This is so exciting.
Mhm.
Not because Jeff is not here. Let me quantify that. Jeff is unfortunately not here but fortunately for him, he is in Hawaii.
Mhm.
So he'll be out for the next 2 weeks, so you won't hear his voice. But as a compromise, we have prepared for you today a special episode. Something that's been threatened for a long time. Threatened might be a word that Jeff uses. We are covering Giallo today.
Yes. As I said last week, the horror movies of my people. I'm
Well,
70 I'm
my people.
75%. I'm 75%.
Well, let's
Italian.
not get into a peeing match on this
Mhm.
because I am Italian as well. 50%. I don't know if that 25 makes you more of the nationality than me, but I can say my people as well.
That's right. Okay. So horror movies of our people.
Of our peoples, yes.
Okay. But the interesting thing, of course, about both of these films, and we should obviously, before we start talking about the films themselves, we should do a little discussion of Giallo and what it means. And
I just watched a great documentary last night.
was it All the Colors of Giallo?
Yeah.
Yeah,
was,
and I
it was.
watched that too. There's a DVD edition of that has 5 hours of Giallo trailers.
5 hours?
Yeah,
Is it every Giallo film known to man?
I think it's every Giallo. It's 3 discs. It has the documentary, and then the rest of it is trailers. So, like, if you just wanted to assemble like a giant wish list of Giallo films that you wanted to watch later, that is the thing to get.
I think that those trailers are usually longer than trailers that US audiences are used to, like 3 minutes, not unheard of. Because I've seen some of these trailers. I'm like, this gives a lot of the movie away.
Yeah. The DVD of Blood and Black Lace that I have has like a trailer section at the beginning, and there's like 2 trailers and it's 10 minutes long. They're like, the trailers are really, really long.
Speaking of trailers, if I had seen, I don't know if it was a TV spot, but on the disc of Suspiria, they had the trailer. If I had seen that as a kid, I would have been traumatized for life, more so than anything else I had ever seen on TV as a kid. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but it's like kind of like a takeoff of the Psycho turn where you see like the back of a woman's head and there's like a hand brushing the hair and then it turns and it's a skull. Yeah, that would have done me in.
I think the key thing here is to establish that what the specific elements of what's considered a giallo are. Suspiria does violate one of these for sure. Violates a couple of them, but I think the main elements are still there. I think that's actually, if you watch Suspiria right after you watch Blood and Black Lace or vice versa, I think actually what strikes you is how similar they actually are, despite the supernatural elements.
Because they talk about this in the documentary as well. You know, giallos are nonlinear. They don't necessarily have to make 100% sense. And the Argento movies, especially after a certain point, because he says in that documentary that watching one of my movies is like looking into one of my nightmares. And you've got to know that watching one of my movies. And nightmares obviously don't make sense. There's a bunch of events that very much add to the creepiness in Suspiria, but don't actually have anything to do with what's going on, like the maggots and the bat. I'm like, these are just random occurrences.
And they're just, I mean, I feel this about Blood and Black Lace, and I feel this about Suspiria, that they're kind of like, it's 99% atmosphere, you know? So it's about the color, it's about the set dressing, it's about establishing a mood, it's about all these other things that aren't necessarily related to the plot. So people are probably wondering, why are these films called Giallo, which means yellow in Italian? And it is because there was a series of pulp novels that started in 1929 called Il Giallo Mondadori. Mondadori was the publishing house, and they were like pulp novels, very similar to what we had in the US. They had these yellow covers. They're very distinctive. If you're interested, go look up Il Giallo Mondadori online and look at the covers. They have a very distinct look. There's a circle in the middle with like a sort of action scene, and then the rest of the cover is yellow, and then it has the title and the author. This kind of writing became popularized during the fascist period in Italy. Mostly they were Italian translations of books from overseas. They were Agatha Christie novels, and they were Chandler's, and they were Dashiell Hammett's and things like that. There were a couple of Italian writers who wrote crime thrillers that were published by Mondadori. Augusto De Angelis is one of them. He was known as kind of the first big Italian writer of crime thrillers. His books were considered anti-fascist, anti-government. He was actually arrested for writing them. Ultimately, he was killed by a fascist activist. So it's like quite a tragic story. But the style became popular, and then after the post-war period, there was a real flourishing of Italian cinema. During the fascist period, there were these films called white telephone films.
These are Italian films?
Yeah, they're Italian films. They're known as white telephone films. And they were made during the fascist period. And then there was a very strong period of censorship immediately post-war. They're very idealized. They're very socially conservative. They were sort of light comedies that tried to imitate American screwball comedies. And they were called white telephone films because in the films, the characters always had white telephones, which were seen as like this sort of symbol of like upper middle class prosperity.
Oh, now were they known as white telephone films at the time, or did they get that name years later?
I think that they were known at the time as that, but it became a pejorative. Post-war, post-censorship period, you really start to see this flowering of change in Italian cinema in the late 50s, early 60s, when some of the censorship restrictions start to be lifted. You get Italian neorealism, and then you get, of course, the beginnings of the Giallo film with Mario Bava, which is, of course, the first one was The Girl Who Knew Too Much. It was shot in black and white. Blood and Black Lace, I think, is the first Giallo film.
That sets the
tone.
Sets the outline for those that were to come later. Now, have you seen a lot of the German movies that also influenced The
I've
Giallo
only
films, the
seen
creamies.
I've only seen a couple of them. I feel like somehow I just haven't watched a lot of German films. I've watched a lot of German expressionist films. I feel like I've watched Cabinet of Dr. Caligari
Yeah.
and, of course I watched Murnau and I've seen M, sort of the highlights.
The
but
touch tones, yeah.
As a genre, I really just haven't watched a lot of German film overall. So I haven't seen a lot of them, but I know that they were very influential.
Because they were imported into Italy, because they were well known in Italy as well as Germany.
And the interesting thing about Blood and Black Lace is that, Bava uses these red telephones throughout the film, which I feel are really in some way like a very specific callback to those white telephone films, except he's telling you this is not going to be one of these nice, light screwball comedies, it's going to be something completely different.
Blood and Black Lace is about murders happening in a fashion house. So it's like House of Gucci run red. I loved the use right away of that red velvet mannequin. And it just seems like, talk about hyper realism as we were at the start of this conversation. The colors are so vivid. In both films, thanks to the restorations, that it's a marvel to behold. It's so sumptuous. Without the benefit of 3D technology, it brings you into the picture. There's a warmth, and literally so, because red is just so prevalent in both of these movies.
So in that documentary that we watched, the film historian who sort of does the sort of overall.
Yeah, get this guy a glass of water, because he just goes on and on without a breath, it seems.
He talks about how there are what he calls 7 elements that are sort of tie most Giallo together. So the first one is the killer's dressed in black, right? Hat, trench coat, gloves.
And in Blood and Black Lace, I love the use of the mask. Terrifying.
The killer moves in shadows. The killer always uses a blade at some point, even if they use different items. Because in Blood and Black Lace, there's some mixing up here of different forms of killing. Very staged, choreographed murders, which this is one of the things that actually, for me, really ties Suspiria into the genre, because Suspiria actually doesn't have a lot of murders, but they're all very elaborate.
They are. It's almost like the murders are more important than the mystery. Look at the Agatha Christie movie that we watched a few weeks ago. Murder happens, and it's all about the whodunit. Who was where and when with whom. The murder is the set piece here. It's not trying to solve it.
There's also what the film historian called body count films, which is like some of the later Giallo are just an excuse to generate body count. Certainly Blood and Black Lace has this, because there's a lot of killings. Suspiria doesn't have as many, and that's one of the things that's interesting about it.
But the killings that do occur in Suspiria are so over the top. This is probably why.
And my it was funny too, because my son was watching it with me. He hadn't seen it before, and he was like, how long is this movie? And I said, oh, I think we have a half an hour left. He's like, hardly anybody's died. He was disappointed. There is a long period where there's not much happening murder-wise in Suspiria.
You see, I wasn't conscious of that as I was watching it, because I was just letting the thing unfold around me. I just liked looking at it. That was my main enjoyment of it.
It is. It's such a beautiful movie. Showing the killer's point of view is another kind of main feature of a Giallo.
Oh, yeah.
Non-linear narrative plots are not unusual. So those are kind of the main tenets of a Giallo. And I think probably we talked about we would start with Suspiria, but I know that some people don't consider this a Giallo, but I think it has many, many elements.
We mentioned Goblin, or the Goblins, as they're called in the credits. It's not just music, it's noise, and it's accentuates what's going on screen. It's definitely not used as background mood. It is upfront, in your face, in your ears. If you took, and I was thinking this as I was watching Suspiria, if you took the music away, the effectiveness would be cut in half, I think. The creepy music sells it. Absolutely.
Well, yeah, I think that in a very large sense, it's sort of it's sort of telling you how to feel, right? It's giving you that uneasy, it lends to that uneasy feeling that you have almost from the start, right at the beginning of Suspiria. She gets off the plane and she's walking through the airport, and you hear that, I think of it as like the music box theme. There's like this very light,
like a creepy lullaby.
Yeah.
Which you would never fall asleep to.
It's a very light kind of what I think of as the music box theme, and it plays a few times throughout, and it's used right away to establish that something's not right. And you see people going in and going out of these automatic doors, and they're disappearing into the darkness behind the doors. It's like they're going through the doors and they're passing into another world almost.
Now, this is also something that struck me, is that Argento gives you a close-up of the mechanism of the door, so it looks like a guillotine.
Yeah, it looks frightening, right?
Yeah.
Just the movement of the door. It looks, right away, it just creates this feeling of unease. And then, of course, Jessica Harper is like, she's so waif-like. She has these huge eyes. So she just looks like this delicate little doll going, and you just immediately like, oh my gosh, she's this very fragile person is going out into this scary, scary world, and obviously he chose her for that reason. He
wanted like a Snow White type for this, and she definitely fits that bill. Now, as she's leaving the airport, before she leaves the doors, there's a harried woman that leaves the doors before her that she sees that disappears into the night. Then once you see the girl leave the school, is this supposed to be the same person? Because they're dressed in a similar fashion. Did he just do that? Is that the same person, even though that would make no sense?
I don't think it is the same person, but I think it's supposed to give you this idea that, again, sort of like in a nightmare where you're seeing the same thing over and over again in different contexts. And I think that's, again, just part of establishing the mood, the tone, the atmosphere, like from the very start. And he uses light, this kind of strobing light right away, like as she gets into the car, and you see these different colored lights, red light, there's a green light, just kind of different light on her face to just establish like this is not the world that you know.
And this could be said for watching any Giallo movie, that this is not a conventional mystery. Anything goes here. And because of this, I think an American audience watching these, you're not in a familiar place. That's part of the allure as well for me.
And he doesn't just use set direction, or set decoration, although that's part of it. It's also the sort of angles he chooses to shoot at. There's a lot of things that just make you feel like things are slightly off kilter. There is a very elaborate murder scene right at the beginning.
Wow, this murder scene. Just wow. So the setup is that Susie Bannion is the American coming to Germany, and she is going to be studying at this world-renowned academy of dance. And I don't know what kind of a Yelp score they've got. It's got to be pretty low, because dancing does not seem to be first thing on the agenda at this school.
In theory, they dress for dancing, but a lot of other things seem to happen.
Yeah, who graduates from this school, right? And what really, how much weight does this graduation does this have? But yeah, Susie Bannion's coming from America, and she's on her way to the school. It's a terrible raining night. She gets in the taxi to bring her. And the school itself, the facade of the school, just deep red, to borrow a phrase here. There's a girl that is coming out the door, very harried, and she says some mysterious things that Susie catches and then runs off into the night. And then Susie can't get in. She gets back in the taxi cab, and I love this shot. As the cab is going through the trees, she looks out the window and she sees the girl running through the trees. Yeah. Love that shot.
She's ostensibly in a city, right?
Yeah.
But there's this woods, this like haunted woods right in front of the academy, which lends just again like this completely different kind of atmosphere. And then the girl goes to her friend's apartment and she's like, I'm so scared, I don't know what to do. But then of course it turns out something has followed her.
something. Looking into the nightmare aspect, because you see this monstrous arm come through the window as she's looking out the window. Suddenly there's green eyes looking back at her in the night, and that's all she sees. And then this arm comes through the window and grabs her head and pushes her through the window. And then that's not enough, but you've already seen an elaborate stained glass design in the ceiling of the foyer of this apartment building. So whoever this is drags her up there, throws her through, and hangs her through the hole in the stained glass. So she's hanging there, and her friend sees her, and then her friend is impaled by the debris coming down from the glass. So it is it is a killer opening of this movie. And talking about the colors, it reminded me of Dawn of the Dead, the vivid red crayon quality of the blood. It's unrealistic, and Tom Savini has said he's made fun of the quality of the blood in Dawn of the Dead, but I love it. I just think it adds to the visceralness.
It's so different from most American slasher films where they tried in some sense to make the blood look realistic, right? It looks so thick. It looks like paint. You know, it has a completely different quality from the kind of corn syrup based blood that they use in most American horror movies. Again, a completely different look, but the look is so important to everything in this film, in these kinds of films in general. So much of it is about the look of it. I just want to talk really quickly about the things that I found that were very similar to Blood and Black Lace. So Blood and Black Lace takes place in a fashion house. And when you first come into the house, there's sort of a big, almost octagonal open space, you know, where the girls are dressing and stuff like that. And you have the same thing in the dance academy when she walks into the first room of the academy, and it's this like blue velvet, and it's got the same sort of general shape as in Blood and Black Lace. You have this sort of big open space, and then of course you have a similarity in that in the fashion house you have a whole parade of beautiful models to kill, and here you have a whole parade of beautiful ballet dancers to kill.
Yeah. And I couldn't help but think that David Lynch must have been watching this very closely.
Yeah, with the blue velvet, right?
Yeah. And even the red curtain room in Twin Peaks, I think he's taken a lot from this.
There's also, even though you think there's no sort of black gloved killer, later in the film there is sort of a prototypical killer, because it does seem that these killings are being done by different people.
It does, yes. So are we supposed to ask, or because this is an Argento film, we're not, who that killer is in the beginning? Is it Pavlos, the sinister lurch that's at the school? Because I think he'd be the only one that would look like that, you know, at least arm-wise. Well,
the long fingernails, so of course we're jumping ahead. Spoilers, lots of spoilers here. So if you would like to watch Suspiria and you don't want the denouement spoiled for you, stop now, go watch the movie, come back. Helena Marcus, the Black Queen, has the same kind of long black fingernails when you finally see her at the end.
But it's a muscular, hairy arm.
Yeah. So it's really hard to tell. It's also hard to tell, you know, if her spirit is somehow possessing the rest of the coven, or if they're sort of acting of their own accord, because I always assumed that Sarah was killed by Tanner. But is Marcus sort of inside her? Or is...
Yeah, I don't think Tanner needs any help to kill anybody.
But I think that there are some of the killings are sort of supernaturally based, and some of them are not. I think some of them are like sort of straightforward.
Or conventional killings.
Yeah, like human on human murders. There is sort of a central mystery, you know, because obviously something's not right here at this academy. You have this sort of central mystery, like a classic Giallo. Again, similar to Blood and Black Lace. The killings are happening to keep the secret from being uncovered. You know, in Blood and Black Lace, the killings are happening to keep this, you know, the secrets that are in this diary from being exposed. And here, obviously, it's this coven of witches that's trying to keep their existence a secret. And all the killings are sort of related to people who have uncovered secret or are about to uncover the secret, except for Daniel, which just feels like a straightforward sort of vengeance killing. My son and I were talking about this, you know, the dog, Daniel is blind. He has a seeing eye dog. His dog bites the nephew of the head of the school.
Let's talk about the nephew, the page boy, Albert.
Yeah.
What is up with this kid? It's like he just stepped in from Children of the Damned. The same haircut and everything.
Yeah,
and the menacing cook as well, who's kind of his guardian, I guess. Albert is the nephew of Madame Blanc, right? Is that what the relationship is?
Yes.
Yeah.
Her nephew. It's very obvious, I think, if you've watched any number of horror movies, that the dog knows something is wrong with these two. And that's why the dog attacks.
But
right?
they were menacingly approaching that dog. So
Mm-hmm.
who knows what happened before the attack?
Right.
Who knows? The cook could have bitten Albert and blamed it on the dog.
It's true. They could have lashed out. They could have kicked the dog or something.
Yeah,
we don't know
yeah.
because you don't see it. You don't see what happens. But then they kick Daniel out because his dog has bitten the nephew. And then later, I think it's very cruel what they do, actually. Again, Daniel's walking through this square and the dog, again, senses something's wrong, right? Knows something's wrong. The dog is barking, barking, barking. And then it appears that the dog is possessed and kills his own master, which is
nasty, because it's a loving close-up of the dog ripping out what you assume is Daniel's throat. And then, the police finally hear a commotion and they chase the dog away. So,
but again, I think that there's quite a lot that's still left to your imagination. Like your brain is actually doing a lot of the work there because you see the dog bite.
Well, that dog is pulling on what looks like skin. So,
right.
So it's a pretty intense scene.
But then, yes, obviously they make it look like that. But then but your brain is filling in the
what's below
picture. Yeah.
What's below what you can see.
Yeah. And I think this is what's so interesting to me is that one of the critiques of this film was that it was, all gore. I mean, this film is gory, but it's, it's so hard not to compare it to today when like the standards of gore are completely different. But even by the standards of then, this film isn't even as gory to me as Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah, but these critiques come from uptight American reviewers, And that's all that they can see, what's superficially in front of them.
I mean, I think part of what makes this film powerful is that, again, like in a nightmare, your brain does a lot of the work. Your brain fills in the gaps. You see a lot of things that aren't necessarily there. And for my money, the worst scene is when Sarah ends up in the pit of wire, which, may I just ask why there's a room?
Why there's a room of wire? Because I thought to myself that very same question. I'm like, is it barbed wire? No, it's just wire. And why is it coiled? Is it just for this occasion? In case somebody escapes the attic and through this window?
There's so many things that are confusing about that scene because she has the wherewithal to stack these heavy trunks, but she doesn't just push one of them in front of the door.
I know. Or she just doesn't hold the lockdown with her finger. That would stop the killer coming through.
I know. I mean, that scene is absurd. But then I'm thinking, why is she just jumping out this window? She could be jumping out the side of the building. She clearly hasn't looked to see what's there because she lands in this pit of wire. But that's one of those scenes where you don't necessarily see like her flesh getting cut by the wire and stuff. There's like there's a little splash of blood, but your brain is filling it in. Your brain is doing the work because she's screaming.
And
right?
She's already been cut. So she's already bleeding. So it does give the impression that the wire is cutting her, but there's actually not any more blood on her than there was when she went through the window.
And it reminds me a lot of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Actually, I was thinking about Texas Chainsaw Massacre as I was watching this, because Texas Chainsaw Massacre, like this movie, is sort of 99% atmosphere. For a film that has the word massacre in the title, it actually has surprisingly little death, comparatively speaking. And a lot of the killings in Chainsaw Massacre are really about your brain filling in the gaps. And I was thinking about the scene in Chainsaw when the girl gets hung on the meat hook, and you
Right.
don't see anything. You don't see
Right.
anything.
There's no blood at all.
But your brain is telling you that the hook is going through her back and she's screaming.
And she's selling it with her expression and her screaming.
Right. And that's what really happens, I think, in this scene where Sarah falls into the wire. Like your brain is filling it in. So you're just sort of like, your body is pulling away from the screen because you've been convinced by something you're not seeing, that something very terrible is happening. And that's part of the reason why it's effective, is because so many weird things have happened up to this point.
And the other question is, who leaves a case of food in the attic rather than the kitchen? Right? Oh, it must have spoiled in transit. Maybe it spoiled in the attic. While,
Yeah, the maggots are the grossest thing, truly.
Yeah.
Like it's like I can take any amount of human mutilation, but like maggots falling in my hair, no.
Yeah.
Like absolutely not.
We're great witches, but not very smart cooks. So we didn't know to put the food in the refrigerator.
The red light you see kind of throughout the film, my son started calling them murder light.
I love the use of it, actually, after the maggot scene, when they have to go sleep in one of the dance rooms and they have the curtains up to separate the teachers and the boys from the girls. And they're white sheets, but they're all lit with red light.
And that's the first time you see the Black Queen, although you don't know that it's her.
Yes, she's got sleep apnea, apparently.
Yeah, she's a very distinctive snore.
Yeah.
Later, it takes Susie, I think, a disturbingly long time to figure out that they're drugging her food.
Now, why would she be different than anyone else at this academy, any of the other students? Why would they be drugging her food?
I'm not sure.
Want her to stay. She goes to live with Olga because she doesn't really want to stay in the academy. And then Olga disappears after Susie collapses, and then they bring her back. You never see Olga again. So you're like, what happened to her?
Again, like this definitely has the feeling of a dream or a nightmare where there's just sort of like when you're dreaming, things just change, right?
Yeah.
Stuff just sort of peters out and then there's no resolution, there's no follow-up. One thing I did think was interesting in the All the Colors of Giallo documentary was Lucio Fulci talking about his apparent personality clash with Dario Argento, which I was like, this is so weird that Argento hates Fulci. But anyway.
Well, you never get that. You get a sense that Fulci hates Argento because Argento never even mentions him in this documentary.
But Fulci claimed that Argento hated him. Anyway, but he was like, Argento is a great director, but he's a very bad writer. Is there an argument for that? Maybe. Maybe he's just doesn't follow through on his plot threads and he's just more concerned with the way things look versus crafting a kind of coherent story, because in a sense the coven is almost like a MacGuffin. It is sort of the central mystery at the heart of the film, but it like solving the mystery doesn't feel paramount. The only person who seems really invested in solving the mystery is Sarah,
because her friend was killed and the other students don't care apparently, or they don't realize that anything's off. But it's Sarah that realizes that there's something wrong, and that kind of infects Susie.
She's very frustrated because she wants Susie to like pay attention and be invested in this. And every time she's trying to talk to Susie, Susie's like falling asleep
because she's drugged.
Because she's been drugged. Yeah. It is not clear, if you're looking for some logic here, it is not clear why Susie has been singled out versus all the other girls. It also seems to an extent like Olga is some kind of conspirator. with the coven, although she's not there at the end of the film.
Yeah, well, Olga is a classic mean girl, right? There's that weird scene in the beginning where she's hissing like, I'm like, what is going on?
And then later, Susie has in a moment that is very, very reminiscent of Tippi Hedren and the Birds. A bat flies in. Even the angles of the camera are the same. If you think about it, the way that Argento shoots this bat flying into the bathroom and then like sort of attacking Susie's head. And it really looks like the scene in The Birds when Tippi Hedren's character is attacked by all the birds in the attic. And it is such a random thing. But again, it just adds to this feeling like of something is really not right. By the way, if a bat attacks your head, it has rabies. So please go get a rabies shot immediately.
I believe that bat was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I don't think that was a particularly evil bat, rabies nonetheless.
Yeah.
But we also get Udo Kier.
Yes, in such a non-menacing part.
And such a dubbed version of Udo as well.
We should talk about the dubbing because this is pretty common. I mean, if you look at the actors' mouths, they're not speaking Italian, they're speaking English.
Yeah.
And in the case of Blood and Black Lace, it was the same thing. Some people knew how to speak English. Some people sort of did a phonetic speech, and then it's like dubbed over
afterwards.
It's interesting because it's the same thing with a lot of the Bruce Lee films. They were shot in Cantonese and then they dubbed the Cantonese over it. So then it's like, they do a pretty good job of matching the track.
Although obviously it's not 100%, but I just think it adds to the otherworldliness, the mystique. Something is not quite right here.
And if you're wondering why Italian films were shot in English, it was because, first of all, a lot of times these films were not just funded in Italy. They were funded by like international or like different European production companies, but also because they wanted to sell them on the international market and they didn't think that they would be as popular if they were shot in Italian and they had to be subtitled.
And in this case, obviously the character of Susie played by an American. And so there were often a mixture of nationalities in the actors that were involved.
Right. And you were just talking about Udo Kier, right?
Yeah.
So
for the story, he's accurate, right? They're in Munich.
They're in Germany. Although it's so funny, we kept laughing because they kept saying ciao. We're like, they're not going to say ciao. They're in Germany.
Right. Yeah.
It's interesting because Susie doesn't seem quite as, like I said, quite as engaged in the mystery until Sarah goes missing. So it's not until basically the very end of the story that she starts to be concerned. And then she's left alone in the academy. Everyone else has gone out.
Now, this begs another question because they say that the students have all gone to see the Bolshoi. So you get the sense that they've left Susie here purposely. But when she goes and does her Scooby-Doo and she goes through the hidden door and she goes down the corridor and she listens in on the meeting, they're just bringing up at the, in the minutes that, we should kill Susie. We should kill the American. So it doesn't sound like it was like predetermined. It's like, maybe they did forget to give her a ticket to the Bolshoi.
She's not supposed to be here when we're talking about killing her.
She was sleeping, so nobody thought to give her ticket.
Yeah, again, this is just one of those things where I think that this movie, and I think the comparison to David Lynch is pretty apt. I think that you really just have to let it go, give yourself over to the sense of the film. When we watched Prisoners of the Ghostland, I said the same thing.
Yeah.
Like, you just have to let yourself be in the space of the film because it's obviously not going to be a traditional narrative. I think that's really what you have to do if you watch this film. You just have to kind of sit down and let yourself be invested in this, again, in this mood, in this atmosphere, in this overall sense of dread that Argento is putting on screen.
And what a sense of dread it is. If you watch this thing as you should, with the lights out and no other distractions, it does envelop you. An Argento movie is unlike any other, even, in terms of Giallo. It is, you're watching an Argento.
And I think that he's probably the best known Giallo filmmaker in the US. There's a lot of Giallo films that just never really
Someday every once in a while with this, he approached mainstream success. The one I think of all the time is Phenomenon with Jennifer Connelly. Just because I was well into my horror phase then, and I was very aware of anything that was out at the time. So I think that was probably the Argento film that I was most familiar with, was Phenomenon.
I'm pretty sure this was the first one that I saw, and then I remember going back and I watched The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, and I watched Deep Red, and his films are different. He has a very, very strong visual style. He talked in the documentary about he seemed a little slightly bewildered by the affection he got from what he called the younger generation. He seemed a little mystified that so many younger people really enjoyed his films. But I think that if you're a fan of horror, if you're a fan of thrillers, if you're a fan of David Lynch, if you're a fan of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, if you're a fan of like atmospheric, moody films, then you should watch this. This is really, I consider it essential viewing. If you only watch one Italian horror film, it should be this one.
Which is why I chose it. This was the first one that came to mind. If we were going to talk Giallo, we have to talk Suspiria.
Although when we were watching the documentary, I was pretty interested because, Fulci, I think of as being one of the gorier.
When you get post-zombie, he kind of leaves Giallo behind and goes into straight horror films. Again,
we were talking about the criticism. Of course, when I was looking at the history of the critical response, the first one is Janet Maslin. And did she like it? No, she did not. This woman, I don't know why she goes to horror movies. She clearly hates them. Every single time we do a horror movie and we look up the contemporary critical response, if Janet Maslin did it, she always hates it.
Maybe her publisher didn't like her and always said, go see the horror movie, Janet.
I mean, because we talked about her famous Dawn of the Dead review. She didn't even stay for the film.
What made her stay for Suspiria after that, getting hung through the ceiling and made her leave? Was it just the zombie bite at the beginning of Dawn of the Dead that made her leave and get up? That's the only thing I could think.
I don't know. I mean, the beginning of Dawn of the Dead is more gory. I always assume she stayed through the scene where like all the zombies are in the room eating everybody up, because that's like a pretty gory scene.
And Roger and Peter are executing them.
Yeah, because that's a pretty gory scene, and that's right at the beginning of the film. So because I think in the review, she said she stayed about 20 minutes, right?
Oh, okay.
So that would tally, because that's a lot right from the get-go. And here there is this very elaborate murder scene right at the beginning, but then it's toned down for a while. You don't see another death until you see Daniel.
And again, these are very memorable death scenes. These are the things that stick out in your head. That trailer, what did it say? The only thing scarier than the last 12 minutes of Suspiria are the first 90. Or something to that effect.
Yeah.
Susie has a showdown with the Black Queen. She's awakened and she's not too happy that Susie woke her up. And then Sarah comes through as a zombie. So you get a little bit of zombies in here as well. The goblin score just goes off the charts in this final confrontation. My fists were clenched by the time the credits rolled. So yeah, I would second that if you have never seen Suspiria, if you've never seen a Giallo, that this is an excellent place to start.
Did you watch the remake?
I did.
Okay.
The 5 or 6 hour remake or however long it was. Because as I was watching this, I'm like, why was the remake that long?
That's always the question, right?
Yeah.
Like, why is it so long? Because honestly, you can only sustain... it's like 98 minutes, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think that you can only sustain this kind of atmosphere for so long before it just starts to feel meandering.
Yeah, but the remake does have good things about it. It's got the Tom York score. I don't dislike Dakota Johnson, but it tried to over-explain things, and I thought the ending was a bit much.
Well, that's what I mean. Like, I just feel at some point, a lot of remakes of older horror films don't seem to get, I think, that part of the tension, like generating the tension, is keeping things relatively tight.
Yeah.
And I'm saying this with a grain of salt for Argento because, it's not a tight plot per se, but I think keeping the runtime tight is important to kind of maintaining the tension for these films. I'm not saying that there can't be a great, really long horror film, but I struggle to think of ones that are really, really long. In general, I feel like they're about 90 minutes long.
Yeah. Well, Dawn of the Dead is over 2 hours.
That's true. That's true.
I would have wanted more. I would have been happy if it was that there was a third hour of Dawn of the Dead.
That's how we always are with our favorites, right?
Yeah. But yeah, you're right. Generally, you are absolutely correct.
In general, I think most of the ones that are considered classics have a pretty tight runtime. And I just think that the longer it gets, the more likely you are to kind of lose that sustained tension that you get. And I think it's just better for the storytelling.
And once this thing ends, the first thing you see in the credits is you have been watching Suspiria.
Yeah.
It's almost like they might as well say you have survived Suspiria. Congratulations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely think everyone should go out and give it a try. Even you, Jeff.
It's not that bad. It's just like me the first time on the Tower of Terror. After it was over, hey, that was pretty fun. Some details. 20th Century Fox released this in the US, but they were wary. It came out in February of 1977 in Italy. It was released by Fox in July, but they released it via International Classics and not through Fox because they're like, do we want to be that closely tied with this? I don't know. But they put it out, and it was the 7th highest grossing Fox film of 1977. And this is in a year when Star Wars, a Fox film, was released. It made a modest amount, $1.8 million. But it was up. It was in Fox's top 10 of the year. So The Village Voice loved it, at least, even if Miss Maslin did not. But they did say, and we've been saying this as well in this discussion, a film that makes sense only to the eye. So I thought that was a pretty good assessment of it.
Yeah.
Roger Ebert, he didn't come through with this one.
Yeah, it's unusual. Siskel didn't think much of it, but Siskel didn't usually like genre film either. So that wasn't surprising.
But Ebert wrote it off as a weak imitation of The Exorcist. And I don't think it has much in common at all with The Exorcist.
I mean, The Exorcist is, I think, again, like this film, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's amazing when you look at these 70s horror films, how much of it is about establishing a mood, sort of less about tight plot. I mean, obviously everyone thinks of The Exorcist. They think of the very extreme ending when Regan is completely possessed, right? And she's puking pea soup and she's swearing and all this other stuff, right? But they forget that the lead up to that is 99% atmosphere. It's 99% just establishing this mood of dread and unease. And like, I always thought the worst part was like some of the medical scenes in The Exorcist, not the part at the end when she was really possessed.
You know what's funny is that The Exorcist is one of these, I've seen it, but I don't like to watch it. And because it really gets to me. But the one scene that I took away more so than any other was the one when she's in the MRI.
Yeah.
That's whenever I think of The Exorcist, I think of that scene.
And it makes you feel uneasy because that sound of the machine, it like gets in your stomach, right?
Yeah.
It makes you feel just really, really off. But that's really what The Exorcist is doing. It's establishing, this sort of mood throughout the film. Then you're completely prepared, right, for the end of the film when it gets really extreme. But the film is not extreme throughout, and a lot of the 70s horror films are like that. If you think of The Wicker Man, right, The Omen, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I mean, it's really about establishing a mood. Like I said, it's very hard for me not to compare when you look at some of these reviews and they're talking about how these films are so gory. And obviously they're probably gory for the time. Then you think about, like, we just saw Halloween Kills, which is like a butcher shop.
And also it should be noted that in today you see more gory things on TV. Like The Walking Dead gets away with stuff that would never even be considered for television back in the 70s and 80s and 90s.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of these films are considered classics. It's not just their place in time. It's because they do a lot with very little, and they establish a very strong mood. And I think that the modern horror films that are successful are the ones that follow that template. That's one of the reasons why I'm crazy about Us, because it's not a super gory film. It has its moments of gore, but it's not a super gory film. It's mostly about the mood that's established in the film, and that's one of the reasons why I love it.
Another really weird thing that I read is that initially the school was meant to cater to a much younger clientele, that the girls originally were meant to be between 8 and 10 years old.
Yeah.
But the studio was like, they didn't want to work with young actors. It wasn't like that they were hesitant because putting these kids in like a life or death scenario. It's like, we don't want to work with kids. You never work with kids or animals.
Right.
There's already an animal in this movie. So that was one thing too much for them. Jessica Harper turned down a role in Annie Hall to lead Suspiria. I don't know what she would have played in Annie Hall. This wasn't in the documentary, but I read it online that Daria Nicolodi, who is Argento's partner, I believe during this time, she's the screenwriter, and she was inspired by a story her grandmother told her, who went to take piano lessons at some elite school. And she thought that there was black magic going on, and she fled the school.
So I read this, and then I read that this may be apocryphal and something that Argento just made up.
Because that's a great story. That is a great story.
The verity of that story. I don't know.
I'd like to believe it. Believe it. One of the final movies done in Technicolor. And you could tell. Yeah. You can tell.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. It's just so beautiful. I think people don't think of that when they think of horror films, that they're beautiful, but this movie is gorgeous. In my opinion, Blood and Black Lace is gorgeous. Like, you just have such deliberate design and cinematography and lighting, and it just creates a whole kind of gorgeous, saturated experience.
So, is this a 5 bucket? I would go high. I would go 4.5 for Suspiria.
Yeah, I think I would agree. 4.5.
Yeah.
I don't think I would say 5, but yeah, this is an undisputed classic. And again,
would you say it's your favorite? Is it your favorite Argento?
Is it my favorite Argento? I really like Deep Red.
Deep Red is very good,
but it would probably be a tie between the two of them, for sure.
Suspiria. So let's go to the concession stand quickly, and let's come back for Blood and Black Lace.
Imagine seeing almost all the screen's scariest monsters alive, in person. Hunchback of Notre Dame, Teenage Frankenstein, Daughter of Dracula, The Fly, a man's body, a fly's head, Rodan, the flying monster, the colossal beast, and more, many more, never here before. Plus, Super Shocker number 2, Spooks A-Poppin', a thrilling new idea in spook shows. We double dare you to see this double header of super monstrous, superhuman, super shockers.
Okay, we're back. How old were you when you saw this? Was it, fairly...
This is later.
This is later, because this is, I think that's with most people, because Suspiria and movies like that are really the headliners when it comes to looking into Giallo and Italian horror. Something like Blood and Black Lace is after you've seen those, tent poles and going back to see, okay, what inspired all this. And so was the same for me as well. I didn't see Blood and Black Lace until, years after my horror fascination started. And that was just doing research and going back and wanting to see what came before.
I don't know about you. The first Bava film I saw was Black Sunday. Yeah,
I think the same as well. And, just after watching that Giallo documentary, I went and watched Bay of Blood. I'd never seen that because they mention it. They single that one out as being like a big influence. And I'm using that word kindly for producers of things like Friday the 13th. I think that some of these scenes are ripped off from Bay of Blood.
Lamberto Bava, Mario Bava's son, was very adamant, that his father was always ahead of his time. And I think that you can see that, his early films are very gothic. And then he moves into what we think of as the Giallo period, The Girl Who Knew Too Much, Blood and Black Lace. Blood and Black Lace is like 6 years before The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, which is, Argento's film that was considered the one that sort of launched the Giallo
because
cycle.
At the time, unfortunately, Blood and Black Lace didn't launch, much of anything. It wasn't until that in 1970 that the genre really took flight.
But there's no Bird with the Crystal Plumage without this film. This film is, and I think that Lamberto Bava is absolutely right that his father was ahead of his time. He was always sort of way ahead of the curve in terms of like what the trends were going to be. Because of that, he was never super successful because he, was always a little ahead of what was going to end up being popular. This film, I think, is so stylish. There's just no other word for it. So beautiful to look at. Again, a gorgeous restoration. It's a 2K restoration. Makes the film just look so crisp and bright. He has all these beautiful little pops of color all over. Yeah,
we mentioned that red velvet mannequin, which just catches your eye every time that's in the frame.
Well, just from the opening credits, which I love, which shows all of the actors. It's functionally, it's like picture credits, right?
Before we get into the credits, you have the Blu-ray, correct?
Yeah, I have the Blu-ray.
Was it in Italian with English subtitles?
So there's two versions on the disc. So you can watch it with the English track, or you could watch it with the Italian track.
Because the version on Tubi is the Italian track with the English subtitles. Because that's what I watched.
So I watched the English, which is the version that was released internationally. Again, we talked about this earlier with Suspiria. The actors who could speak English, there were a lot of Americans, Mary Arden, Cameron Mitchell, a couple others who could speak English. There were actors who spoke phonetically in English, and then they dubbed over the track. The very weird thing is that Paul Frees does most of the
I read this. The ghost host himself.
You can tell that it's him because he has such a distinct, I think of it as like a vibration almost in his voice, like this sort of, it's so hard to describe. It's like he has this undertone in his voice that's just present when he talks. And as soon as you hear him, you're like, that's Paul Frees, Yeah, so I watched the English version, but the credit sequence, I want to talk about this because I love it. I think it's so beautiful.
Because you love roll call credits, but they usually come at the end.
It shows all the actors in these posing like mannequins in a room full of mannequins. And I love this because it establishes the atmosphere, kind of right away. There's a commentary track with Kat Ollinger on the Blu-ray that I have, and she calls the opening score, she says the jazz score is sleazy. And I can see that.
I think it is. And I think just like the Goblin score in Suspiria, I think it adds exponentially to Blood and Black Lace.
Right away, just like in Suspiria, there's an elaborate murder scene right from the get-go.
Poor Isabella.
In her red coat, walking kind of through this tunnel of trees. Again, just beautiful visuals, like gorgeous use of light and shadow, a kind of strobing light on her face so that she appears and then she disappears. She appears and then she disappears.
How long does she have to walk to get to this place's front door? It's like it didn't feel like it was that far away.
Right. It's like she's walking through like a maze or something.
Yeah.
Right? She's got to walk down. There's like a colonnade that she walks down, like these marble steps, and then she's walking through these trees. She's passing the fountain. There's like all this stuff. The killer, the black trench coat and the black gloves and the black hat and the very menacing, white bandaged face,
Right.
who grabs her. And again, very elaborate murder sequence in the sense it does seem like it goes on for a while. She's struggling, trying to strangle her. And she's screaming. He's throwing her against the tree. Like it goes on, a minute maybe.
Yeah. And it should be noted as well that all the women that die in this all end up in some state of undress. So the murders are very lurid.
Yes. And actually, again, great commentary by Kat Allender on the Blu-ray. She said Bava wanted the film to be a pulp cover come to life. And if you think about most pulp covers where there's a woman in her lingerie, right, and there's a looming killer behind her on a lot of those covers of those pulp novels, and then you really see that in this film. I actually want to talk about Isabella's state of undress in terms of the American cut. One of the things I want to mention before I get there is that one of the things I like about this film is that Bava is always juxtaposing something beautiful with something horrible. And you even see that in this scene. The killer is dragging Isabella's body, and he sort of very deliberately almost pulls her through the stand of flowers, and you see these beautiful flowers, kind of juxtaposed against the horror of this dead body. And I just think it's one of the things that he's always doing. He's always showing you something beautiful, and he's showing you something horrible at the same time. Very quickly, American cut versus European uncut. So on the Blu-ray, there's about a 25 minute sequence, no commentary or anything, just showing you this is what a scene looks like in the American cut, and this is what it looks like in the European
Okay.
cut. At first you're watching it and you're thinking, oh, they didn't really change much. I'm going to use the example of Isabella's murder. So the killing part is really not changed at all. But when she's being dragged away, the whole sequence where she's dragged through the flowers is cut out. And I have to think it's because you see part of her breast, part of her bare breast. You see her garters, her
underwear. Yeah.
And they cut it down. So you just see that for like a little flash as the killer pulls her away. And I have to say that this speaks so strongly to me of this American puritanical streak, in that we will not cut the scene where the woman is brutally murdered. That's fine. Mm-hmm. Brutal murder is fine. But don't show any part of her body. That's unacceptable.
Did they do this throughout?
Yeah, a lot of times, like the cuts,
same kind of cuts.
A lot of times, the cuts seem more about sexual content or potentially sexualized content, and less about the violence, which I think is just so telling about what we consider quote unquote dirty, right, in this country.
So this is Isabella that we're talking about. This is the first kill in Blood and Black Lace. So she is one of the models that works for the Countess Christiana, and so she owns a fashion house in Italy. And so this is where runway events happen. This is where the clothes are designed, and this is where the models congregate, and also the clothing designers as well. So you have this community of employees that work under the Contessa, and also the house manager, Morlacchi is his name. And so you're introduced to Isabella, who's one of the models, and it appears that there's lots of drama going on behind the scenes, because not only is Isabella killed at the very beginning, somebody shows up that we later find out is Isabella's boyfriend, who's also seeing someone else, Nicole, on the side, this guy's a drug addict. So Isabella was trying to break him of his addiction, where Nicole is feeding it. And this is all transpiring in the first 5 minutes of the movie. So that there's lots of gossip going on. The killer takes out Isabella, then somehow stashes her while everybody's present in the closet inside, because she falls out a little bit later. And this really sets things in motion when Isabella gets discovered.
And again, I think that there's so much kind of to see in this movie, so much going on in the background. And one of the things that I always love is those bright red mannequins
Oh,
Just some of them are red, not all of them. And they look completely grotesque in this room full of beautiful women in beautiful dresses, right? And then you see these very, very lurid, blood red mannequins set up at different points throughout the rooms. Of course, well, color is super important. It's not just about color, it's also about light. And I would really point to the scene where Nicole gets killed in the antique shop, that strobing green light from the dance hall next door. So striking. And again, it really creates a mood because green light makes you feel kind of sick. It has like a sickly quality. The antique shop is full of objects, so it's full of creepy shadows, and you have the light, and then you have all these shadows, and then you have one of the more gory killings because the murderer uses an object that he finds in the shop.
It's like a barbed like piece of that suit of armor, right?
Yeah.
That he impales her face with.
Mm-hmm.
So
you don't see it. You don't
see it. No, it's like her point of view, that this thing coming at her. But again, these murders are staged very elaborately, but I don't think it loses that the whodunit side to the story.
Yeah.
Because I think that they kind of run neck and neck, where something like Suspiria, it's all about the murders and less about, what's actually going on. That's not the case here. It does engage you. Who is doing this out of these people? The original title of this, and I love it, 6 Women for the Murder is the Italian title. And I think I would have preferred that as the English title as well. It's more Giallo sounding, right? than Blood and Black Lace. Kind of tries to outdo himself with every murder. Poor Peggy gets interrogated and then dragged up to the attic, and her face gets burned on the. And what is a furnace doing in the attic, by the way? Was that what?
Peggy definitely gets the worst of it because she's tortured, and like that scene goes on much longer than the other scenes. But all of this is because Isabella has died, right? So we find out later, of course, the murderer has killed her because she knew secrets she was blackmailing. It turns out she has a diary.
Ooh, and that's the MacGuffin right here. Yeah. It's the diary.
And the discovery of the diary is so great because you get a shot of every single character looking at the diary, right? And every single one of them is clearly concerned that their secrets will be exposed in this diary. And to me, it's such a classic, almost like Agatha Christie-like scene where everybody's like, oh no, my secrets are about to be exposed. And then because Nicole has found the diary, she puts it in her bag, saying that she's going to take it to the police the next day. And so then you have all these wonderful shots of this black patent leather bag, which, by the way, all the women seem to carry a very similar bag, which is also a little bit of a visual trick. The bag is on the table and it's sort of in the foreground, and you see all these characters kind of glancing back at the bag as they're going about their business because they're actually trying to put on a show while this has happened. There's a runway show happening. And then, of course, it turns out that Nicole is killed for no good reason because Peggy has actually taken the diary and put it in her black patent leather bag.
Now, do you think Nicole was sincere that she was going to take it to the police? Because she would have been incriminated, I would assume, because she's seeing the boyfriend on the side.
I think that she probably would have looked through the diary first to see if she was mentioned, and she would have torn out the pages. But then I think she probably would have brought it to the police. That was what I thought was interesting about Peggy's decision to burn the whole diary.
And the killer doesn't believe her. Or either that or he's just a sadist and just wants to torture her anyway.
But I think it's a little weird because obviously the killer wants the diary and wants to get rid of the diary, right? So when she says she threw it in the fire, he's digging around in there. I'm like, is he trying to get it out?
Yeah,
why would you want it back?
Yeah.
Right? She did you a favor. She burned the whole thing. I think it was surprising to me, the first time I saw it, that she didn't just tear the pages out that referred to herself. Tear the pages out that refer to you, throw it away, bring the diary to the police.
Or maybe she thought that was futile. It's like, I'm through this whole thing. I got to throw this whole thing in the fire.
right, Peggy's tortured, which is terrible. And poor Mary Arden had to do 4 hours of makeup. There's an interview with her on the Blu-ray. 4 hours of makeup to do the burn scars on her face. And she spent 5 days playing a dead body because of all the characters, her body sort of gets moved around the most. And she was like, it was horrible. I got really bruised. She's like, I'm being pulled up and down stairs and being tossed over her shoulders and like dropped onto the floor and all this other stuff. And by the way, she never got paid.
Yeah, I read that some of these actors were paid on like a weekly basis and some chose to get their payment at the back end, and that never happened, apparently.
Yeah.
At this point, the list of suspects is getting narrower and narrower. And the police inspector, who is completely impotent in this, like he offers no help or protection for any of these victims, unfortunately. He rounds up all the men at one point from the fashion house to keep them in the station. And he thinks that doing this will stop the killings because he's convinced it's one of them. And he's not wrong, but he's not entirely right either.
Right. Very Scream-like bait and switch here, where it turns out there's actually 2 killers. And one of them is a woman. And that's where it gets kind of interesting, right? Because that scene where she kills Greta, she just kind of smothers her with a pillow. And it does not have the same quality as the other 3 murders. And then you realize, she's done this thing basically to free her lover from prison so he wouldn't be suspected. Max is like, very happy with her because, you did the right thing and you made it look like a sex maniac, right? She took the 2 bodies, she took Peggy's body and Greta's body and sort of stacked them like in a very suggestive way. And then she made it look like something that it wasn't.
It's always a sex maniac. Why do they always have to go there? Do they not have forensics back then? Just a cursory exam would say, okay, that's not what's going on here.
Of course, because Greta is conveniently in her slip.
Poor Greta, the tension ratchets because once Nicole is dead, Peggy's dead, obviously Isabella's dead. Everybody disperses after the men are arrested from the fashion house. And Greta doesn't want to leave because she's alone. She's like, I'm all by myself. Whoever her fiance was at the police station, right? So I don't want to go home. So that she's the next one because she's freaking out. And then she finds the body and feels the need to drag it inside her house. And as you said, that's when the Countess, dressed up as the killer, smothers her.
You don't really see her train of thought here. I assume that she thinks her fiance has actually killed Peggy, and that's why the body's in her trunk. Because otherwise, why wouldn't you just call the police? Right. So that's what it seems like maybe her train of thought is here. He did it, and I have to make sure that he's not caught. Otherwise, I would have personally have left the body where it was instead of trying to drag it all over the place. Because by the way, dead bodies are heavy. The thing about the Italian title versus the American title is we know that 6 women will get killed. So, at this point, you're like counting down. You're like, okay, there's only 2 left. And, who could it be? The working title was called The Fashion House of Death, which I kind of like that too.
Yeah, that one is a good one too. But the Contessa is, when she kills Greta, she's covering for Morlacchi, who is arrested with all the other men. So to take suspicion off him, once Greta is killed, the police have no choice but to release everybody. We get Tao Li's death. Now, you might know more about this than I do, but this is not a Japanese actress, obviously.
It was supposed to be. That was why.
They do make some effort for her to look, although it is not convincing whatsoever. Just as a casual viewer, that there's some kind of flim-flam going on here.
Right. So there was a Japanese actress, Yoko Tani, who was cast in this role. And then for some reason, she couldn't come on. So they brought in this French actress. who replaced her, and then
But they didn't change the character. They didn't change the character.
I don't know why they wouldn't. Like, I mean, it's not a big deal. You can just change her name.
That's the only tie to her nationality. I don't think it's ever mentioned other than that.
And the thing about Claude Dante's that I read that was really weird is that she did one of these Sleeping Beauty diets. You're basically drugged to stay asleep, and then you lose weight because you don't eat.
Because you don't eat.
Yeah, you do it for like 3 or 4 weeks.
So you go into hibernation.
Yeah, basically to lose a lot of weight. So she had lost like 30 or 40 pounds right before she came on this movie, doing one of these diets so that she could be maybe more slender Japanese, like, I don't know.
Her death serves to kind of throw suspicion off of the actual killers, because by this time it's revealed that it is 2 killers, Morlacchi and the Contessa herself. She's a widow. Morlacchi and Contessa had it in for her ex-husband or her late husband and killed him. So there's been murders going on before this movie even started.
Yeah. And like all women, you should not trust the man who helped you kill your husband. Because it turns out that he would like to eliminate her too and just run away with her jewels.
With her money, yeah. So Tao Li is about to go to Paris very smartly, wants to leave before she gets killed. Yeah, but they're going to place the blame on Tao Li, taking the outfit, the killer's outfit, and throwing it around her apartment after making her death look like a suicide. And there's a great scene where you get the close-up of Tao Li's face under the water, and the blood starts to cloud.
The blood.
Yeah. You only see the blood for a second. And again, from what you were saying before, your mind kind of makes you think that you see that longer than you actually do.
And I think that is such an important part of films like this, especially from this era, where it's just like you're really doing a lot of the filling in, because like I said, you don't actually see the club go into Nicole's face, but because you see that shot of the spike sort of approaching the camera, you feel like it's coming toward your face, right? You're wincing away as it's happening. Again, like this film was, American reviewers thought it was just full of gore and all this kind of stuff. But I think he does a pretty good job, much better than Argento for sure, in Suspiria, of trying to keep a semblance of a plot going throughout the film, so that there's some kind of logic to the mystery that you're following.
Yeah. And if it wasn't for the diary, I think the murders would have ended at Isabella, because she was about to blackmail the pair because she knew about the husband being killed. And that's when the diary suddenly surfaced. They freaked out because they thought that would incriminate them for the death of the husband. So they had to kill everybody else to stop that from getting out.
You were talking about the tagline for Suspiria. And of course, the tagline for this on the movie poster is guaranteed the 8 greatest shocks ever filmed. Guaranteed. Yeah.
So 2 more shocks other than the actual 6 murders.
I was really racking my brain trying to figure out what the shock that the revelation of the 2 killers at the end.
the 2 reveals, because you would need you have Morlacchi and then the Contessa, so maybe those were the last 2.
And I again love that kind of the last shot. And Bava always using that sort of pop of color. The last thing you see is the dangling red telephone over their dead bodies. The
quote from Variety was an okay mystery with a few chills here and there. Like, unless you were drugged yourself watching this, I can't see how you'd come out with that impression of it, but that's what they said.
Bava's taking steps to take things to sort of the next level, but I think it's very much in a Hitchcockian tradition of a thriller.
Yeah.
I don't think that this kind of plot would have been unseen in the US, and certainly because Giallo themselves were primarily American pulp novels, and the noir tradition had been very strong in the US for a long time. It's not really any different from a lot of American noir films, except in the elaborate murder sequences, obviously.
Wasn't a huge hit. But again, we said earlier that the genre didn't take off until Argento's bird with the crystal plumage. But its echoes reverberated throughout the 70s in these movies. So what kind of buckets? I don't know if I'd give it as much as Suspiria, but the buckets still need to be high just because of its significance. So I would give it probably four buckets.
Yeah, I'm gonna say 4.25. I like this one a lot. I just think I like Bava in general. I think that he's, like I said, such a very stylish director. I love his gothics. I just think he's very distinct, visually, especially when you put him in his time and place, you can tell that he's always trying to push the limits of the genre and try to do something new. I really wish his work was as well known in the US as Argento's is, because I think he's really my favorite in terms of the Giallo films. He's really my favorite director. Actually, and he didn't just do Giallo. Like I said, he did gothics. He did a lot of like straight horror. He did a lot of stuff. He was just a very inventive kind of director who always seemed to be a little bit ahead of the curve.
Agreed. So this has been a very enjoyable episode, and we've only scratched the surface of what Giallo has to offer. So Jeff, I know you're listening out there.
Mm-hmm. So, I know you want to watch more Giallo films.
Yeah. It's not so bad. Once you rip off the Band-Aid, it's actually a whole world opening up to you. So maybe someday we'll make a sequel to this episode. Now, we've all seen and we've all heard about the Oscars, which took place a week or so ago. The shocking moment, Coda won Best Picture. Which we were all expecting Power of the Dog. So unfortunately, Drive My Car did not win Best Picture, or that would give a lot more publicity to our next episode, because that's what we're covering next week is Drive My Car. And you've seen it already, correct? Did you see it theatrically?
Yeah, it was at the Music Box for 1 week only. I would just feel so fortunate sometimes, not only to live in a city where you have more chance to see those kinds of films, but also like the Music Box is so close to my house, so sometimes there's no excuse for me, it's like it's right there, so I just have to like zip over and see something. It's a great movie. I'm showing my hand a little bit.
Now it did win Best Foreign Film.
I am not surprised. It didn't have the kind of momentum behind it like that Parasite did, and obviously Parasite's win was historic.
Yes. So that's why I thought maybe it has an outside chance because of the door that Parasite opened, but it didn't happen for Best Picture.
It didn't have that kind of momentum. And also you talked about the surprise win of Coda, and I think this goes back to the ranked choice system of voting that the Academy uses. So I know that we talked about this when Parasite came out, but it was a couple of years ago. So basically each voter takes all of the films that are nominated for Best Picture, and they rank them, what they would consider the best 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever. Yeah. And then when all the votes are tallied, if no film has a plurality of votes, then they remove the film that has the least number of number ones, and then their film that would be listed number 2 would be bumped up to number 1. So I think, I'm not trying to take anything away from Coda, but I think that's probably how it won. I bet it was probably a lot of Academy voters' second best film, but there was no plurality for a number 1 film. And I can't help but think the similarities of Power of the Dog losing to Coda is kind of the same thing as Brokeback Mountain losing to Crash, right? Yeah. Like a thing that should never have happened.
Yeah, it may have divided quite a few voters.
But of course, they still want to acknowledge the film. So just like giving Ang Lee the director's award for Brokeback Mountain, they give Jane Campion the director's award for Power of the Dog. But I'm not trying to take anything away from Coda at all. I just do think that when you have a ranked choice system, it doesn't necessarily mean that like the cream rises to the top.
Right. Our second feature choice to go along with Drive My Car was Inspired. You came up with it. Let us know what we're watching as our second feature next week.
I've honestly been looking for an excuse to do a Jim Jarmusch film for a while now.
And this is an outside of the box choice, but I think very appropriate.
And so I picked the anthology film Night on Earth because it is, in fact, about 5 cab rides around the globe and takes place in a car, various cars, right?
Various cars,
So,
yes.
So it seemed like it would fit well thematically. We don't do
Yeah.
too many anthology films. And again, I'm just been looking for an excuse to talk about a Jarmusch film. I can't believe I haven't convinced you guys to watch Ghost Dog yet. But
that's coming, right? You've already given away that's going to be a $5 bucket for you.
yeah. And so, when we have time one day, I'd love to watch that.
Yeah. Drive My Car and Night on Earth, both available on HBO Max for those of you who are so inclined to watch the movies along with us. And thank you if you're one of those.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for listening.
Yeah.
And
thanks,
thank you for coming along on this little Giallo journey with us. I hope that we've inspired you to go out and at least try these 2 films.
Yes, and start there and then go deeper, please. And Jeff, we miss you. Hope you're having a good time.
And when you come home, you have to watch these movies.
Yes. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Thank you.
Hey, everybody. If you like what you just heard, be sure to follow TMI Confessionals of the Nerd Kind on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or whatever you listen to your favorite podcasts on. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and then share it with your fellow movie nerd friends. It means the world to us and helps our listenership grow.
You can also find us on all of the socials, Instagram and Twitter at TMI_podcast 2018. We're on Facebook and YouTube as well. Just look for the Popcorn Bucket.
You can help support this show by visiting our TeePublic page for some TMI branded goodies such as hoodies, t-shirts, mugs, and stickers. teepublic.com/TMI Confessionals, all one word.
A 5-star review would be incredibly nice as well. I'm just saying.
Thanks again for listening. We truly appreciate you. Be sure to come back next week. We'll save some popcorn for you. By the way, if a bat attacks your head, it has rabies, so please go get a rabies shot immediately.